recorder at local files.
Good to go.
Thank you. All right, we're getting started. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on shade plants. We are just now getting started, so it's going to take a couple minutes for everybody to log in. I'm just going to go over a few notes before we start. For those of you who are new to this class, welcome. For those of you who aren't familiar with this format, we can't see you or hear you during this class, so Peg's going to be taking questions during the class, and you can send your questions in by writing them in the Q&A box on your Zoom menu. So for most of you, that's probably at the bottom. It might be on the right side. So just take a look and find that Q&A box. If you have any technical issues during the class, please feel free to send me a chat and we can work with you to see if we can help you out. Finally, we will be sending out a recording following the class, and Peg has provided a list of plants that you guys can follow along with on her slides. So if you didn't get it by email about an hour ago, I'm going to send a link out in just a minute once Peg gets started, so you guys can access that. Peg works at our Fair Oaks store. She's one of our plant specialists and designers, and has a lot of experience from years of working at the Garden Center, hosting our Gardening Advisor television program, and has been doing classes for us for many years. So Peg, looking forward to hearing from you today.
And I always look forward to being with all of you, and good afternoon, and what a lovely afternoon it is. A little windy at the moment, but we had a very good rain last night, and thank goodness not damaging winds. And so the temperatures are right, everything is right for fall planting, and fall is a wonderful time to plant. And we're talking today about gardening with shade, varying degrees of shade. And I, of course, speak well to that because that's what I've been doing for 65 years. And most, in fact, I think every one of these pictures are from my garden. And some of you will recognize them. That's okay. Hopefully you don't mind being refreshed with some of this. But I'm not presenting to you all of the latest and the greatest necessarily. What I am presenting are the things that have performed well for me, the things that have survived. And yes, I lose plants too, okay? I think we all do. So I'm going to talk to you about the shades of shade, and pretty much ask you to look around your property and identify where your shade is. How much shade? Do you have it in the morning hours, in the afternoon hours, dappled during the day? Or are you talking about shade that's in the shade of an evergreen or above a house and doesn't get any direct sun, maybe indirect light? Because different plants serve different purposes. And we'll talk more about this as we go along. But let's bring up the first slide, Danny. And the first one says to me how wonderful shade can be. This is actually just outside my back door. And it is an area, a lot of the front of it, in the center part of this fairly large area is all Ostrich Fern. And yes, it is a native. It is actually native to my property. And for some reason or other, several years ago, some underground stream, water, whatever, in this one section became quite moist. And the things that did not like that unfortunately died. And then this fern began to plant itself in there. And I decided, okay, you can't scramble all over everything because you're contained by the sidewalks, etc. And it really is beautiful, but this was catching it in the early morning light. And you know, we have to understand that there's more than just the plants that make our garden exciting and inviting. And one of them is perhaps the dew in the early morning, or the light that's cast as it is here in the early morning. And I find when I walk out with my cup of coffee, that it's just a delight to be out there. And in the next picture is a little bit closer view of that ostrich fern. Ostrich fern does not want to grow where it's dry. It likes some moisture. And so if you have a moist area, you can certainly grow ostrich fern. Now it does die back in the winter time, but I really don't mind, because within that same area, and quite competitive with it, although I have to pull some of it up every now and then, you can just see the beginning of a large bed of camellias. And in front of that is a border that has many, many different kinds of plants in it. And all of this is either under or adjacent to a large holly tree. And so there's a lot of evergreen going on. This garden is planted for 4 seasons of interest. I want to say that it is a large garden, but don't be intimidated by that. As you look at these pictures, think about, do I like that? How would it fit in my garden? Let's say that you have a townhouse back garden, as a couple of my, 2 or 3 actually, of my grandchildren do. And they're always walking about the property, seeing what they would like to include in theirs. But it's a fun thing. I have every aspect of the shade. In fact, I have areas that I can grow a lot of sun plants because they get afternoon sun. And it is the afternoon sun that things like this ostrich fern do not like, okay? So in the next picture, we'll continue around the corner and down the path beside the outside door of my home. And there is a border just across from that ostrich fern, in which I have boxwood, a layer of boxwood. I love, love, love boxwood, that's for sure. And I have many different varieties. Some of the newer ones that are resistant to some of the issues with boxwood, but I also, thank goodness, haven't had those issues with any of my boxwood. Now, beneath them, the last program that I did was ground covers. But ground covers are so, so important to me to enjoy them, number one, but also to keep down maintenance, because I cannot maintain this garden to the degree that I once could, okay? So at the base of this, and just coming into flower, because this is late spring, is a lovely ground cover called Saxophrega, okay? Now, some people call it strawberry begonia, but it is not a begonia. It has a beautiful variegated leaf that is evergreen, and it does bloom in the springtime. And with that, you can see a variegated carex, which picks up the color in the flower of the Saxophrega and also in the variegation. So you've got something very complementary there, but you've also got something that contrasts. You've got the contrast, the contrast of the carex that looks very grassy, along with the broader leaf of the Saxophrega and the boxwood. And then just over that side is the sunken patio at my home. And this is a wonderful little private area if you want to have a quiet cup of coffee there. And it is surrounded by various plantings beneath a quite large Japanese maple. There are also some cascading Japanese maple in this area. So you've got the pickup of color from those maples. You can see the tippy tops of the boxwood that we showed in the previous picture. And now you're looking down on what is beneath this maple, which gives some delightful shade in that area. And even things in containers. I have caladiums growing in containers there. As you'll see in several of the pictures today, I depend a lot on containers for some of the color and the shade. And up from that, there are azaleas. And in the next picture, beneath that Japanese maple that you were seeing in the previous picture, the tippy tops of, this is a plant that I totally enjoy. And it will grow actually in quite a lot of shade. If you're looking for something that you really do not have a lot of light, this is a good one to try. And it grows somewhere from 2 to 2.5 feet tall. Lovely green. It is an evergreen. It does have a very fragrant, it's called Sarcocoa, and its common name is sweet box. And it's called sweet box because it kind of looks like a lot boxwood, but it has these very fragrant blooms, usually in February, March, sometime in that area, depending upon the weather, okay? And then across from that, as we go up the steps, out of this sunken patio area, I would like you to look particularly closely at this, the next 2 or 3 pictures, because here are some plants that really might be of value to you in small areas with a lot of shade, particularly if you don't have deer. Now, I do have deer, okay, more than I would ever want. Not that I want any, okay, because they love hosta. And I have to spray them with Bobex, and I have to be fairly religious about that to keep them from eating my boxwood. But I mean, not my boxwood, they don't eat boxwood, my hosta. So here there are varying sizes of hosta, and there is a nice grouping of fern, and this one is brilliant, Bryopteris brilliant. And there's, again, those cascading Japanese maple. There's Pieris japonica. And in this next picture, you can see this is the other side of that. And there are a couple of lovely Pieris japonica there. These are plants like azaleas that don't want to be planted in hot afternoon sun. They're lovely plants, but you're not doing yourself a favor if you put them in the hottest afternoon sun, because every insect around seems to find them under those conditions, whether it's red spider mites or whatever. But I really don't have to worry about that because they don't get that hot afternoon sun. And now they're forming their blossoms, which is attractive. And in the spring, their new growth is usually a lovely red. And then you've got those different colors. Most of mine are white or shades of pink of the flowers that last for a long time. But underneath that is a ground cover, again, of more of that Sarcocoa or sweet box. I have a lot of plants, but I also have continuity in through here because I do some repetition of plants, which is pleasing. I have the Sarcocoa in 2 or 3 areas, so it reads well here. And along with the hostas and the fern, it does present a ground cover that is sufficient to keep down most weeds. So I rarely have to weed in this area. I also have some boxwood in containers back there. Boxwood does extremely well in containers, provided the container is large enough. I wouldn't plant one in a container that would be smaller than at least 14 to 16 inches wide. And I have enjoyed those for many, many years. In the very next picture, this is directly across from that, and in the edges of a lot of primarily oak. Most of my property has oak trees. There are a few tulip poplar, and that's the canopy of my garden. And it's amazing how that canopy gives you a relationship or a feeling of safety within your space. So there are a lot of large oaks. There are a lot of tulip poplar and the larger plants there that is the canopy. If your shade is from maple, the large maples, not the Japanese maple, but we're talking about large trees now. If your shade comes from one of those maple, you're dealing not just with shade, but you are dealing with root competition, because their roots are surface rooted, and it is very difficult to grow anything beneath them. So oftentimes they'll say, create a nice sitting area under there if you've got a small space and a big maple. That birch can do that too, and beech. All are surface rooted plants. That's a part of your canopy. So we'll talk more about this canopy as we go along, but this is woodland, okay? And I have so much growing in it. Right here is a row of beautiful boxwood. I think this particular variety is Varder Valley, which is a larger leaf and a very green leaf. And I find that plant quite attractive. On the other side of it, you're seeing one of the golden carex, which is the grassy looking plant that you see. They are fantastic with some shade. They don't really like the hottest afternoon sun, but they'll grow in good dappled light and full morning sun. All of these plants that I'm showing you will love full morning sun, but they won't necessarily love the full afternoon sun. Now the boxwood does, okay? So there are exceptions to all of this as we go along. There is Nandina there, and yes, Nandina. I know some people are not fond of Nandina. I happen to be. The Nandina domestica particularly, because it does have beautiful, beautiful berries, and which are not eaten by my birds, by the way. I use them a great deal as Christmas decorations, and they are quite beautiful. I do like them. Yes, they do seed a bit, but in 63 years, I've really never had that much seeding from them. With the boxwood, there are a lot of different varieties, and you are seeing also an upright variety in this particular picture. And in this one, you're seeing a close-up, which was over on the other side of those boxwood. You are seeing the hosta. You are seeing the golden carex and fern. Of course, the deer don't eat the fern, and they don't eat the carex. They will eat the hosta. Okay, so I have to spray them, and as I said, I do spray them with Bobets. Now, the next picture. We want to talk about the layers of the garden. We spoke to the canopy, which gives you a lot of shade, which I enjoy. There's less maintenance for me in this area. Yes, I do have fallen leaves, but I will speak to you about those fallen leaves and how I deal with those. I do have a lot of native plants in this area. There's a lot of dogwood. There's a lot of other native plants back here. but I also have a lot of non-native plants, and I love them. I'm not a purist. I love all of the azaleas, all of the boxwood, and so many of the things that I have, the Japanese maples, and I don't really want to part with those things, okay? What I have done is, number one, in the background of this, there is a neighbor. I love my neighbors, and I love being out with people. But when I come home, I like that feeling of enclosure. I like that feeling of privacy. And so many years ago, I developed that privacy back there. There is holly, the native holly, which was there originally. I didn't plant that, and I have a lot of it. So I have used that as a barrier. I also have some arborvitaes back in that area. I have a lot of deciduous things that lose their leaves, but they give you that tall understory. Now we're talking past the canopy, down the next layer, which is the understory. And there's where the redbud and the dogwood and the French tree and the Japanese maple and the dwarfer-sized magnolia all fill that row of understory trees. And for those of you who have small spaces, that may be your canopy. If you only have room for a mid-sized tree and you choose a crepe myrtle or you choose a dogwood, then that becomes your canopy. And you can actually limit up somewhat, enjoy the shade of it, enjoy the shape, the blossoms, the fall color, and you can plant beneath it. But these pictures and your visits to other gardens or your visit to the garden center will show you plants that you like. This is a garden that I have enjoyed for many years and that my family has enjoyed for many years. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is when you make your choices for your garden, be sure that it's something that you enjoy, because life is just too short not to enjoy that plant. If I ever find one that I'm not happy with, it goes and I put something else in its place. So look at the things, look at your garden. What do you want from that garden? How much maintenance are you going to be able to give to that garden? Okay, let's take an upper view of that particular garden, because here are some of the things that make taking care of this, maintenance is the word, a lot easier. There are a lot of beds within this garden. There are a lot of pathways in and among there. And actually, if you took just one of those borders, and I've already shown you 2 or 3, maybe that's the size of your back garden. And so into that you say, I do want some shade, or I already have some shade. These are some of the things that I can plant within it. But I am absolutely showing you things that have been very successful for me. Now, again, speaking to ground covers, almost all of the borders are bordered with something that's considered a ground cover. And in this case, there's a lot of liriape. And I know there are a lot of people that think liriape is much too common. Now, there are a couple of different varieties of liriape. And actually, I was reading in some newspaper column, or maybe it was a magazine, I don't remember, that was talking about how invasive it is. My liriape is not invasive. If you buy liriape spicata, S-P-I-C-A-T-A, that one shoots by runners. and it is invasive, and I do not want any part of it. The only time I would ever recommend that is if you have a hillside that you want to cover, that you do not want to mow, and that it won't involve other plants, then fine. But this is not that plant. This is a clumper, and the clumps do increase in size, absolutely. But I never, ever thought of it as invasive. So I can mow right up against this. I do not have to edge my beds. And then there's also in that area Pachysandra, which I absolutely love, and it doesn't escape because it's within a border and it's mowed next to it. So I don't have to worry about either of these plants escaping and going anywhere. All right, you can see in these pictures, I think, how important it is to have diversity, if you can, depending upon the size of your space, but to have the canopy, whether it's the large oak or other choice, and then the understory plants, which may be your canopy in a small garden with all of the dogwood and the various flowering trees, which will grow with good dappled light that I enjoy all the time. But looking down on this, I think you can see how some of these borders are all divided, and I'm able to mow around them. Yes, I do want some grass because I've got a wonderfully large family that likes to get out and play games. So I have to have some grass. It is far from perfect. It has a fair amount of clover in it, and that's okay with me because the bees love it, absolutely. You can see from this, because it's taken down on the deck, that a lot of my color also comes from containers. But I do have a lot of older azaleas because I rooted azaleas and boxwood and all manner of stuff in my very early days. And in the next picture, to sort of wrap up with this particular area, I wanted you to see what it's like in the fall, because it's nice to plan for a 4 seasons garden. And that is what I have attempted to do. You can see the colors that you're getting from all of these trees. And yes, even the oaks do have their fall color, although it's not as brilliant as the oaks might be. But you've got the change of the dogwood, you've got the golden of the fringe tree, a lot going on back there. And it's a joyful time, even at, even though you think it's going down. Let's come back to me for just a minute, Danny. Let's talk we looked at the beauty of fall. Let's talk about leaves for just a few minutes. I have almost 2.5 acres and a lot of oaks, a lot of oak leaves. I do not haul those leaves away. They are raked, blown, whatever, and made compost. Last year, my son did something that was wonderful because I can't do it normally, okay? After a lot of these leaves were put into a pile, he carefully mowed them with a mulching mower. And so, boy, that really was fantastic. Otherwise, I've got the leaves that aren't mulched, okay? So what do I do with those? I try to layer them. I try to include bales of straw, not hay, straw. And I'll put a heavy layer of that and then put some of the straw. Why? Because that lets air into your pile and helps it to compost more readily. In the season and early, I add the clippings from the lawn because I don't use chemicals on the lawn. And so I add those clippings and that helps it rot down. Obviously, I don't have those clippings, which is the green matter, for compost. but it works really well for me because I layer this in a big area, okay? And you can contain it with a small fence, a little 4-foot fence around if you want to do that, if you've got a smaller space. But that is invaluable. I use all of that. Granted, I never have enough of it. And so purchasing bags of it, and I'm pretty sure, Danny, that we do have it in bulk too, the leaf grow, right? We do have it in bulk if you need more. This is one of the best fertilizers you'll ever have. And I do not work it into my beds. I don't turn the soil except when I'm planting something right where I'm planting it. I spread a couple of inches of this all over the garden. And that is a natural organic that the worms slowly work down and improve your soil without all the back work. Plus, if you're out there turning that soil all the time, even in your vegetable garden, you're constantly bringing up more weed seeds, and you're just making more work for yourself. So I love to just go ahead and put a couple of inches of that. As I said, try your composting if you've got the space. If not, the product that we sell that is fantastic is leaf grow. And that's composted leaves that somebody else has composted, and you don't have to, but it really, really works. So that's a lot of the fertilizer that I use. Other than that, I do enjoy the holly tone. In the springtime, I usually try to put some of that around my azaleas. And then for a lot of the other plants, I totally enjoy Plantone. Those are all natural fertilizers that release their nutrients over a period of time and work with the nutrients that are already in your soil. And while we're looking back, oh, this one I have to show you. I think I do have a picture in here, but maybe not. Camellias. 'Tis the season for camellias. These primarily of the Saxophrega variety, the ones that bloom in the fall. And since we have not yet had frost, mine are beyond beautiful. Just a lovely, lovely plant. And they're quite nostalgic for me because I grew up in the deep South, and my mother had so many camellias and loved her camellias. But it has a beautiful foliage too. It doesn't want to be planted in afternoon sun. It would love it if you plant it where it doesn't get strong winds. And I have a number of these, and they're all in full bloom right now. Now, if you come into the garden center, we have a vast number of these camellias. And it's a wonderful time to buy them because you can see what the bloom looks like. And these are all of these fall blooming ones are all of that very hardy strain. However, we are about to go into November, and the ground is still nice and warm. It's a great time to plant. But when you are first planting these camellias, I want to give them as much protection as I can on this first winter. And so I put a little staking around it and put some additional mulch around it to help protect that root system, to also help keep that root system, keep the soil warmer longer, okay, so that they have longer to get those little roots out. But that's primarily the first year if you're planting in the fall with camellias, okay. At least that has worked for me, okay. I have been showing you and talking about the canopy, the understory of trees. But then the really next important thing after that is what grows beneath that. And then usually, even regardless of how small your space is, you want something that's evergreen. And there are many things. I have in my hand 3 different types of Hanoki Cypress, which is an absolute favorite. And there are some great varieties out there. Some that are more golden, some that are a deep green, and some that are quite frilly. And there are different heights here too. So pay attention to that. Now, while you can trim these, and I usually do this if I want to, or shape it at all, I do that in late March, just before the new growth begins. And it's just a minor amount of shearing or shaping. But primarily, I don't want to have to do that, and I don't if you buy the right one. And I was speaking to a lady here yesterday about some plants that had been just planted way too close to the foundation. And too often we don't leave enough room for our foundation plants, and they do need to be out a little bit. And you do need to realize these plants are going to grow, and that's a good idea. But this is a wonderful, wonderful evergreen. Okay, there are a lot of others. Here is another one that's great, even with a lot of shade. Doesn't like afternoon sun. And that's a Cuba. It comes in green, different tones of the yellow in the leaves. Extremely attractive. If you have 2 or 3 of them, oftentimes if you particularly have male female, you'll get red berries with this too. And that is an attractive plant for quite a bit of shade. There's so many others I should, but it's contrast of textures with the fine of the this particular one here. And let's see, let's bring up, here's a hemlock. Also a fine, and there are dwarf forms of hemlock too. But you can see the contrast of texture in that, which also makes for more interesting gardening. So whether it's the Hanoki Cypress or something like the hemlock, so many others, there's junipers, there's different things that have that fine texture, is nice to balance it off with a broader leaf. And here is another one that isn't as broad as the Cuba. And I really do enjoy this particular one because it's coming into bloom right now. You have to have several different plants of this, I think. But it has a very, very fragrant blossom to this, okay? Love it. Goshiki is that particular variety, mixed with, of course, the broadleaf of the Nandina, which is attractive. So let's move on with this, okay, Danny? Adjacent to that area, stepping down from the deck, is a patio. And there's a lot of seating around this patio, because I said, I love gatherings, and I love the family gatherings and otherwise. But I have a lot of containers, and those containers are planted for 4 seasons. This is spring, obviously, but I am about to redo tomorrow a lot of those planters that still have my summer plants in it. Some of which I will take in and overwinter, and some of which will just go into the compost pile. But when I'm redoing those containers and planting my violas and planting my pansies, I'm going to put tulips near the bottom of that, and then potting soil on top, and then my plants. And they have traditionally gone through the winter just fine for me. And this is then what you get in the spring. You get your violas, you get your other things that are planted with it, and you have these beautiful tulips coming through. And then you could just simply remove them when you transition from the pansies into your summer things. I'm going to have to move along with these now and talk a little less because I've got a lot to go through and I really want to share it with you. In the next one is fringe tree in bloom. This is a native to my property. When it comes into bloom in the springtime, It is so fragrant. You don't have to be standing next to it to enjoy that fragrance. In the following picture is another upright boxwood, which I totally enjoy those boxwood. And it's really fun to have a few objects within the garden that you're interested in. And this one plays quite well against that boxwood. In the front of that is a perennial called Tiarella. In the following picture, I say there are different shades of shade, but there are, in addition to the shades of shade, the colors within it, there's the patterns of light. And we began with the patterns of light in the early morning. This is the patterns of light in the late evening. So there's so many things interesting within your garden. The next one. You want to go down that path? There are a lot of pathways within the garden. And this again is the morning light and the morning mist that's there. The following picture is another wonderful plant. I love this Mahonia Bilii, and it blooms oftentimes in January with all these heavy, beautiful blossoms that are very fragrant, and then forms these deep, almost blue-black berries that the birds love. It can get 8 feet, 7 to 8 feet tall, and it is very prickly. I have people who like to plant it beneath windows, but it grows in a lot of shade also. Not deep, deep shade, but quite a bit of shade. The following picture, understory. We talked about the canopy, we talked about the understory plants and the shrubs. Now we're going to the ground level and the perennials. And this is a native, Phlox stolonifera. I have bulbs everywhere, and I love this particular little miniature daffodil coming through this round cover of Phlox stolonifera. The following picture is almost adjacent to that, and it again is a native, and it's Phlox variegata. And it's growing with hosta and fern, and there are other bulbs there, and it's a ground cover there. And some of this got destroyed when I lost 2 large trees, which we're going to talk briefly about as I go through. And so I'm restoring some of this now in the process. Okay, in that same little ground cover area is Pulmonaria. Primarily evergreen, blooms in the spring, is gorgeous. It has beautiful variegated foliage. In the following picture, along another pathway, is the use of Hakanakaloa, and it's just a beautiful variegated Hakanakaloa. Now, it turns brown for the winter, but I leave it up and I don't take it away until late winter because I enjoy the pattern of this, the texture of it, even though it's brown. Rising out of that, because this is a slightly moist area, is Cardinal Flower, which comes into bloom in late summer and is a wonderful attractant for the bees and the butterflies. How could you do without rhododendron? In the next one. Absolutely beautiful. Rhododendron plays a great role. And then the following picture I had showed you earlier, Goshiki, it's Osmanthus Goshiki, and that is in bloom. And those blooms are incredibly fragrant, does really well in the shade. Okay, the following picture has been my fun project this year. I overwinter a lot of things, and I don't have time to tell you that it is a little bit of an effort, or a fair amount of an effort, to overwinter the newer varieties of elephant ears, Colocasia, alocasia. They're all beautiful, beautiful plants, but they require a different treatment. The old elephant ears, no, they can go completely dormant and they're easy. but these are not so easy. But I did it, okay? I did this and I did a number of other things. Danny, who's helping me right now, came over earlier in the week with his lovely wife and baby, and we did some filming here. So we'll see if any gets used. Because this is where I lost 2 large trees. Unfortunately, it was a storm came through, and one was already leaning, and the roots popped out and took out the roots of the one next to it. So I lost that, and then this area is a little moist because, let's face it, there was a depression there that I hadn't filled with any more topsoil. But anyway, looking for a place to plant all the Camellias that I had overwintered and all of the colocasias that I had overwintered, I decided, I think I'll do it here. It's going to be a little out of context in the edge of the woods, but that's what I'm going to do. And you know, I have not been disappointed. Look, we've all enjoyed it. And these leaves are huge. Danny, would you say that, so those biggest leaves were at least 2.5 feet?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them are. But what it doesn't show in this picture is it was glossy on the surface, but on the back side, it was almost a maroon color. And so it's really beautiful. And I planted those various coleus around it. And I had not grown the newer varieties of impatiens before. And I'm thrilled because they are very resistant to powder mildew. And I'm just delighted. So I added that color tone so that I was keeping my colors all within a certain orangey, goldy, whatever, and was very happy with it. In the foreground, which borders the pathway, is a plant that I absolutely loved. And I love the contrast of color here. We're talking about thinking about not just the textures of the plants, but also the coordination of colors within the plants. And this Ophiopogon actually picked up the colors of the undersides of that elephant ear. And it thrives, and it's just beautiful, and it's evergreen, and I can't say enough good things about it, you know, but it's Ophiopogon, Ophiopogon, Ophiopogon. Delightful. Okay, just we'll touch briefly and then we'll open up to questions. I know I haven't left much time for that. There are a lot of pathways. What I have done with most of those pathways so that it's easy to walk on, easy to take care of, I put down landscape fabric, and then I put 3/8 inch Seminole chips. This is that little red chip. I do not use pea gravel because you bog down in pea gravel. It's very round, and I can't push a wheelbarrow through it. Wheelbarrows go over this beautifully, okay? And you walk on it beautifully. It's fine. Over time, as sedimentation goes into this, weed seeds will blow into it, and you do have to do some weeding. If you use Roundup, that's your prerogative, okay? And it works. But what I am enjoying right now are some products that my son gave to me that I am so excited about. And that is some battery operated stuff. I now have a small battery operated blower that I can use. I even have a small battery operated little chainsaw. And now I have this battery operated weed whacker. So it's amazing what you can whack with that thing. It's great. So I cannot maintain my garden the way I did previously, but I love it. And I'll take some of your questions. I didn't leave much time for that. Sorry
Thanks.
about that.
That's all right. We got a few minutes. The first question is a little bit, it's about deer. Do you have any plants that you recommend that you found are good and deer resistant?
You'd be best, you could go online and hopefully get good information. Certainly among those things that I have here, they don't eat the Nandina. They don't eat the Japanese maple. They don't eat my hollies, but I've heard that they do. They don't eat the osmanthus. They haven't, but they can. They haven't, but they can eat the camellia. Right now, to be perfectly honest with you, it isn't eating at the moment as much as it is rubbing. And they do a lot of damage in my garden because I cannot protect absolutely everything. And I have already protected a few things by putting, I love Bob Warhurst invented a two-piece tomato cage wire, which is wonderful. I use that. But I do try to encircle those most important things with some material that keeps the deer from rubbing them, because they seem to know the expensive plants within the garden, and those are the ones they go after with their horns first during mating season. And that is now.
Oh man, all right. We have a few questions about overwintering caladiums. So do you ever overwinter those? Do you find that challenging to do? I think you may have mentioned that. Sorry,
I did mention that, and we really do not have time to go into that on the program today. It takes a little bit of effort to do that. And there are many different methods. The only method that I can tell you about at the moment is the one that has worked for me. And that is, I have set up some inexpensive drop lights so that there is some light there, but they're down at the edge of the table. And I put them into a container and put a little potting soil around them and add a little water about every 3 weeks, probably no more than a cup or two full, so that I don't let them go completely bone dry. That has worked for me, and that is touching the surface of that, okay? But because we just don't have time to explain the complete process today.
Thanks, Peg. All right, the next question is about containers. This is specifically for boxwood, but I have a feeling we have people with questions that are applied more generally. When you're choosing the size of your container, are you choosing the size based on root growth or the size of the plant, or are you choosing it to prevent damage in the winter, or is it both?
Well, it has to be both. Obviously, it has to accommodate the root ball of what you're doing, but it is primarily to have enough space within that pot so that it is protected in the winter time, okay? And if you're on a deck where you've got air moving under as well as over, it's smart with any of the containers that you want to overwinter, unless they're quite large. For instance, if you do just a 16-inch container and it's up on a deck, as I said, where you've got cold air under and over, you can put bubble wrap around it, tie it securely, and then put a piece of burlap and tie that securely so that it's attractive. That just gives it a little additional winter protection, because I've left mine out for years and they do freeze, but they've been fine. And boxwood will do that. For me, they've gone through the winter a number of years, okay? I have some now that about every 2 or 3 years, I try to lift those gently out of their pots, loosen those roots, in fact, cut back some of them somewhat, put in a little fresh potting soil, a little fresh planktone fertilizer, and put them back in the pot. And they've been in the pot for 10 years. So but this is a larger pot. This is probably 24 inches. But I also have some growing in 16-inch pots, but they're smaller, okay?
All right, thanks, Peg. Next question. Sorry?
Yeah, the only question as far as leaving containers out over winter, and that's a very important question, is do not leave them on the soil, because they'll pick up the moisture from the soil. You don't want that. You can put them on pot feet. If they're on a deck, you want them up off your deck anyway, and that's okay. But don't ever leave containers sitting within the garden on the soil, Do not leave a saucer underneath your containers. If you had those there for winter, take them away now because they'll freeze and they'll crack your pot. With things that are well fired, all my little Mexican type pots are coming in because they are not well fired and they will not go through the winter. Okay.
Thank you, Peg. All right. The next question is about the borders. How do you contain your borders from spreading beyond where you want them to be?
Well, we mow right next to them all the time. Okay, always mowing, and that's not a problem there. I am going to enjoy, and I'm just learning with this little weed whacker, but yes, sometimes things like creeping Charlie, as I said, I'm not using chemicals on the lawn, so I have some of these things, you know, and they'll creep over into that area. It's very annoying, but I've learned that I can now, right next to that area of Liriope and the lawn, I can run that weed whacker and keep all that stuff out just by going right down the line one time. So much easier. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I like that idea. But that's the case, and a lot of the others are bordered by the gravel paths. Okay.
All right, thanks. Next question is, we've had a few questions come in about the mulching process where you use your leaves. Can you go back over quickly and explain if you take the leaves that fall from the trees and turn them into compost, or how you?
I absolutely do. And I realize that everybody doesn't have as much space as I do to compost the quantity of leaves that I have. But if you have a mulching, most people now can't do that because they have lawn services, okay? But if you blow your leaves or you rake your leaves and you do have a contained area, and as I said, the easiest thing, if your area is small, is to do some of this little fencing, you know, and you can even do it with the heavier deer fencing, which is plastic and very easy to work with. But I would put a layer, maybe a 6 or 8 inch layer of leaves, and then buy a bale of straw. Put an 1.5 inch layer of that, then put more leaves, and you're lasagnaing, so to speak. If you're not going to have your grass clippings in the fall, but you can add them in the spring. You can turn it and add them in the spring, and the fresh green clippings help with that composting and the balance of it. And within one season, then the following season, before it's time to do that again, I take that compost, even though it's not totally composted. And I know people say, oh, let it. No, I've done it for years. I take it partially composted and put that out onto my garden, and it works just beautifully. Just beautifully. If you are mowing your own and you've got a mulching mower, that's perfect because you're cutting those leaves up. And you can just put those directly back into the garden. And if you don't like the look of that, you can put mulch on top of them. So that's kind of what I do, you know, but I realize that not everybody has a mower anymore, you know, but you do rake your leaves probably, and they can be composted.
Thanks, Peg. All right, it is 12:59, so I want to make sure we have enough time for you to finish off with any final thoughts if you have any. So quick note to everybody, reminder, we will be sending out the recording tomorrow. If you have questions following the class, I've actually seen some questions about growing grass in really deep shade, digging around root trees, and some questions about issues people are having with plants, please feel free to send me an email. You can just hit reply to your Zoom dial-in email with your Zoom dial-in info, and I can send those questions on to our plant clinic. We have some people who specialize in those topics who can help you out. And then if we have questions for Peg, I can send those to her as well. Peg, is there anything you'd like to wrap up with before we finish?
Basically, enjoy some fall planting because the soil moisture is perfect right now. The temperature is perfect right now. The mosquitoes aren't eating me alive right now. And it's a great time to plant. And we've got so many beautiful ones out there and a lot of new things that you can try. Some of those I haven't tried. I've asked other people about how they're growing for them and so forth, but I almost don't have a place to put them. You know, I've got so many plants. But we've lovely plants. It's a great time to plant. Now, going into winter, watch your lighting, watch your drainage, get to know your garden. Are there areas that are moist? If so, particularly with wintertime moisture. People aren't out in their garden so much then, and they don't think about that. But sometimes if you lose plants, it's because they were too wet in the winter. Okay, and that wraps it up for today. But we will do a follow-up with part 2 right next week, right, Sally?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah. Yeah, so if you're interested, we'll have Shade Gardens Part 2 coming up. So check our website, check your email and look for that class so you can get signed up and join us again next week for Part 2.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks, Peg. Everybody have a great day. We look forward to seeing you for future classes.